many people think it's the sound of the language. They hear sound, it goes to the ear, and then you just need to decode it and put the meaning on it, and then you get it. But that's not really how it works, right? So how does this really work?
Well,
hello and welcome to a new episode of the German Learning Lab. My name is Michael. With me is my friend and co-host Alessio. Hi, Alessio.
Hi, Michael. Hi, everybody.
And today we will talk about a very important topic for any German learner, listening. Why is it so difficult to understand spoken German? What are the causes for this? And of course, what are the solutions? We will talk about the reasons why it's so difficult, because that will help you understand the power of the exercises and strategies that we will suggest in the course of this podcast. Alessio, you are a German learner yourself. I can't remember how I learned it, at least for the most part. You told me that as a foreigner, understanding a foreign language is much harder, but also way more important than speaking it. Why do you think, or why do you say that is the case?
Well, let's take an example. Like, for example, I'm going to fly to Korea tomorrow. And I don't speak Korean. I never learned Korean. So this afternoon and maybe tomorrow on the plane, I surely have the time to learn a lot of sentences in Korean. I'm sure that I have the time to learn at least 20 sentences, because it takes maybe 20 minutes to learn how to pronounce very well a sentence asking, excuse me, where is the train station? Or what's your name? But how long will it take to me to learn to understand the answer? Can I learn in 24 hours how to understand a Korean telling me how to reach the train station? Of course, the answer is no. I will probably need, 6 months, a year, a longer time, of course, way longer. We're talking about months, if not a year, before I can understand one single answer to one of these questions.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
And this is what I mean when I say it's harder. But it's also more important to have a higher level of understanding, so of listening skills in comparison to speaking, because I can ask a question even knowing few words and not being able to put together a grammatically correct sentence. For example, in English, I don't need to ask, excuse me, sir, would you be so polite as to help me reach the train station? I can just say, train station, where? And every English speaker will understand what I'm asking, and so will be able to try to help me. On the other hand, I am not able to control the level of English that the other person's gonna use, and for a reason that we cannot discuss here because they are complex, but native speakers usually will not speak slower or in a more simple way. They will use a normal standard level of language. So you need to be able to understand that level in order to understand what they're going to say. You can even skip words by, instead of saying train, you can say choo-choo, and they understand. Or instead of saying dog, you can say woof, woof, and they understand it's a dog. But the native speaker will not say woof, woof, will say dog. So you have to understand that specific word. And so in this sense, it's even more important that your listening, understanding skills are higher in order to manage these situations. While on the other hand, you can have a very basic mastery of the language and still, handle everyday interactions.
Yeah, you can talk with your hand and feet, as we say in German, right? Mit Händen und Füßen.
Yeah.
Or in Poland, they say you speak like Tarzan. Yeah. So Tarzan, it's a guy that grew up in the jungle.
Tarzan.
Raised by animals. So he had rudimentary communication skills. Yeah. So communication is much easier than understanding, right?
Yes.
I understand that. So you talked about preparing a conversation, or we started with that. Is it even possible to prepare for the listening part, the responses? What would you say?
Well, it's way harder. Of course, you can prepare to a certain point. So if, for example, someone who maybe lives in Germany, has been learning German for a while, so maybe he has a A2, B1, and has to go to the doctor and want to prepare that conversation. Again, to prepare your part of the conversation is way easier. because you already know what are your symptoms, for example. You know which part of the body is hurting. And so you can prepare that part. You can put it in English or another language in ChatGPT and ask for translation, and then learn that vocabulary. Prepare your sentences. So you can be very ready to tell the doctor what's your problem. But how do you prepare to understand what the doctor is going to tell you? Because the doctor, they could ask for anything, like could ask more about the symptoms or maybe about previous history of illnesses, but also maybe about your family history. Or maybe he's going to ask about other therapies you have been having, or going to recommend some therapy or some exams. Anything is possible. And you cannot really know what's going to come. So, of course, you can learn some vocabulary that you guess is going to probably be part of that conversation, but it's way easier to bring ChatGPT with you and ask the doctor to repeat the sentence and ask ChatGPT to translate for you. That's the better way to prepare for that conversation, in my opinion.
If the other side allows it. I've heard of plenty of situations where, for example, at the Ausländerbehörde, they wouldn't allow any tools like that. Yeah. So it depends a little bit on the partner in that conversation. And if they don't allow it, what do you do?
Yes, but to prepare for a specific conversation from the listening point of view is very, very hard. I would say it's better to prepare in general for good listening skills. And that's it. It's very hard to prepare for a specific interaction.
Yeah. So you have to get better at listening and understanding in general. Yeah, that should be your priority instead of preparing individual conversations that might or might not go the way you prepared them.
One thing that may help for the actual interaction is to be ready to ask to repeat. So be psychologically ready. Don't feel ashamed to ask for repetition of sentences or to write down. So, for example, about the therapy, always ask the doctor or the secretary to write down the therapy or the exams and so on.
Ideally, they write it down on a computer because doctors' handwriting is notoriously bad in Germany.
All over the world, I think. Yeah, in Italy too.
So regarding preparing, listening and understanding in general, maybe you can say a few words on why is it so hard to understand a foreign language to begin with? And of course, how do I get better at it? Yeah. Many people think it's the sound of the language. So they hear sound, it goes to the ear, and then you just need to decode it and put the meaning on it, and then you get it. But that's not really how it works, right? So how does this really work?
Well, it starts with the sounds. So there is other stuff. I know what you're referring to, and I want to talk about that because it's very important. But it starts with the sounds. So maybe we can address the sounds first, also because I think is what everybody's expecting.
Yeah, if you want to do that, yeah, sure.
Well, I think it's important because it's the basics somehow, right? And there are a couple of misunderstandings there. So the problem of the sounds is that a foreign language uses different sounds and different differences between sounds. So what I mean is that certain sounds may be non-existent in your native language or in languages you already learned. For example, as an English speaker, you don't have the sound that you use in German, right? Like doch. So you don't have this sound. Or there could be differences that usually aren't important in your language. For example, in Italian, we have the difference between e and e, but we don't care about it. So if I say bene, 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 so 3 different mixes of e and e in the same word, I'm still saying the same thing. So it means good or well. And actually, my brain, as an Italian brain, was trained to ignore this difference so that I can keep understanding that word, even if I pronounce it with a or with e. Instead, in German, the difference between a and e makes the difference between different words, different meanings. So there are these 2 things. And usually people are more concerned about these strange sounds they never heard before. So beginners focus on things like and say, oh my God, that strange sound. But for listening especially, that's not a problem at all. Exactly because it's a strange thing, your brain will recognize it pretty quickly, and that's it. The problem is more about sounds that you usually do not differentiate or sounds that are close to other sounds in the language. So, for example, for English speakers, there are things like U and U. If you are a French speaker, then U and U are two very different sounds. You hear the difference right away. But for an English native speaker, U is not a thing. Same thing for Spanish and Italian speakers. So you will try to find, subconsciously, your brain will try to find sounds that are close enough and hear that sound instead of the original one. But sometimes there are more than one sound similar to the same one. And this is where confusion in pronunciation and in understanding starts happening. For example, you could hear and say U instead of U and instead of U. So for example, zu tun instead of U in this case. But you also say über instead of über. So instead of making the two different sounds, you will make the same one. And when you hear it, when you listen, the same thing will happen. The common example in scientific studies is the R and L in English for Japanese speakers. A Japanese speaker doesn't hear the difference between rock and lock. So the R and the L. But the same thing happens when you listen to German. So depending on the language you come from for these kind of sounds.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? I think the listeners can relate strongly to this. Now, the question, of course, arises, how can I learn a sound that I'm not able of hearing? How is this possible? Do you have any suggestions, any ideas here? And you mentioned the Japanese struggling with the lock and the rock. You know, if you say I got hit by a lock, could have, well, it still hurts, right? But any suggestions here? How can I do this?
Yes, there are many things that you can do in order to learn how to hear these differences and recognize them and also pronounce them correctly. And in general, I recommend to practice listening and pronunciation of sounds together. One helps the other and they go well together. And the first thing is to focus on the specific phonemes, the specific sounds. So you have to get feedback and understand what are you struggling with specifically. And then exactly you have to contrast the two sounds, which could be either the correct one and the wrong one, or two sounds that you are mixing. And what research shows is that it works the best if you exaggerate them at first. An example can be, for example, the difference between short and long vowels in German. That is very important. And for many students, it's hard to get at first because, of course, the difference is very subtle when German actually speak. And so if you take a sentence like, they are the children. Sie sind die Kinder. You see, I have this I, and the Sie is very long. Sind is very short. Die Kinder. And of course, a German person wouldn't speak like Sie sind die Kinder, right? They wouldn't exaggerate the length this much and the shortness this much. But to exaggerate this and to hear an exaggerated version at first helps a lot to differentiate them and to learn to reproduce them correctly. So for example, for R and L, this is what the study shows. Japanese people learn to differentiate them better if you start with a R, so really strong R sound, and a L, strong L sound. And then you make the difference more nuanced.
Yeah, I read the study years ago and I found that really, really fascinating. And in that study, only 50% of the people doing the study actually managed to hear the difference. But you have to keep in mind that studies have a time frame, right? So maybe they just needed a bit more practice. Who knows? So it's not an easy thing to accomplish.
Also, over a longer time, most of the people become able to recognize the difference, but not to 100%, but to like 70, 80%. So sometimes they still get confused. So the accuracy rarely gets to 100% if we're discussing adults learning the language. Of course, for children and young teenagers is another story completely. But yeah, for adults, you don't get to 100%. But actually, we're going to see that perfect phonetic understanding is not so crucial to actually understand spoken language, right?
Very interesting. And of course, I have pronunciation videos in all my courses covering the core problems English speakers bring with them. I focused on English speakers, but there's still so much more that actually I need to do because it's such a beautiful topic as well, right? As you say in German, the difference between Bett and Beet is a huge one.
Stehlen und stellen, so completely different words. And I'm exaggerating them, right? Because when you speak quickly, the difference is very nuanced.
Exactly. Yeah. So to the listeners, Alessio and I, we might very soon work on a special course even for this so that you can use it even if you don't work with Smarter German. Make sure to subscribe. And if you like this video, this will help us greatly to keep this running. Yeah.
Yeah, like the
and
video.
More people to find it. Yeah. Make sure. So when we're speaking about phonetics, so you actually say it's not just about phonetics. After all. So even students that can recognize German words and, let's say, sounds and can even produce them sometimes have the feeling Germans are still difficult to understand. They feel they mumble or they speak too fast. My wife always complains, I mumble a lot. That might be a personal habit, but nevertheless, it might not always be that, right? So why is that? Why can people that actually have a good listening skill already, why can't they understand the Germans just yet? What do you think?
Well, to be able to recognize the single sounds doesn't mean to be able to recognize spoken sentences and the other way around. So this is a big misunderstanding. People often think that how it works is we hear all the sounds and then the brain puts them together, makes the math, and they have to add up specifically to that word. And this is what we understand. But this is not how it works. In a native speaker, understanding is a process that happens subconsciously and involves a lot of guessing and knowledge of vocabulary, of grammar patterns, of probability of certain sentences, and so on. And we can show that just by removing some information from a sentence, and the native speaker will still understand. For example, I prepared a sentence in German by removing vowels or using just one vowel sound, so O, and I'm sure you would understand. So if, for example, imagine I call you on the phone, right? And I say, Guten Morgen, Michael, ich bin noch am Bett, weil ich keine Lust habe, aufzustehen. Und da hast du schon gefrühstückt. You understand, right?
Ja, ich habe schon gefrühstückt.
Exactly.
It's not that easy to produce, to be frank. Respect. But yeah, sure, I got that. Yeah.
So what I'm doing is, so the sentence, Michael, can you repeat the sentence? So in German, just to show that you understand. So, Guten Morgen.
Ja, guten Morgen. Ich liege noch im Bett. Ich habe noch nicht gefrühstückt. Und du? Hast du schon gefrühstückt?
Ja. Weil ich keine Lust habe.
Weil ich keine Lust habe.
Exactly.
Correct.
So what I'm doing is I'm removing these vowels and changing them to this o sound, right? And Michael is still understanding. He's not struggling that much. He has to focus a little bit more, but he's not calculating the answer. It's not like doing crosswords, wondering, oh, what could be that word? Subconsciously, his brain is doing that for him. He is doing this game of guessing, matching, calculating probabilities of what could be that word in that position, in that sentence. Also, due to the context, all these calculations are extremely fast and subconscious in native speakers. But this is not the case for students.
So that actually reminds me of a song that we sang or said when we were children. It was like Drei Chinesen mit dem Kindribis. And in every verse, we exchanged the vowel for another one. I'm not sure whether that song is still PC nowadays. And I think it also exists in this way in other languages.
In Italian, it does, yes.
Interesting.
It's about Garibaldi. So Garibaldi fu ferito ad una gamba. And then you change it to Garibalda farata da una gamba. Garibaldi firiti di negimbi. You change one vowel for the other. Yes. Of course, this game of saying something using just a vowel works only with simple sentences and where the context is clear, because of course you are guessing, right? But the consequences for us is to understand that the native speaker doesn't need perfectly announced speech in order to understand what is said. And also another thing people should remember is that when we speak, we don't separate words usually. So in written form, you can say where one word starts and where one word ends. And this is not the case when someone is speaking. So I ask, how do you do? I don't say, how do you do? So I always find it pretty funny how German learners are scared by these long words in German, right? You have these very long words like Krankenkasse, right? And say, oh my God, how can I understand that? It's funny because in written form, actually, you have the time to look at the word and figure out where you could cut it. But when you speak, even in other languages, you don't leave any space. So when you listen to English, actually, you are listening to a flow of words, a flow of letters, of phonemes, and you have to guess. You need to have expectations about where to cut this flow of sounds in order to decipher that flow.
So it's helpful to know what people are talking about, right? And it's much easier to follow a conversation if you know what it is about than just a random conversation out of the blue. Even if you are C1 level, if I was thrown into a scientific conversation about rocket science, I would be lost quickly, even though my English is definitely C1 level.
Of course, but it's very important also to have generic expectations. So what we have to learn from what we are discussing right now is that if you're not understanding spoken German, is because you don't have enough expectations in order to make good guesswork. So improve the general level of your German, so practice grammatical patterns, practice vocabulary to get more and more used to the possible combinations of words, so in which orders some words may come, what are common expressions, what are common words. So this kind of training is what will help you understand German better, not to focus on hearing perfectly every single sound, because this is not how German's gonna talk to you. So Germans will not pronounce every single sound perfectly, so forget about it. But also, this is not how a proficient brain works when understanding spoken language. So the best investment from that point of view is in patterns. So you have to learn common patterns, how the language behaves.
And how do I do that? If it's not by listening?
No, actually, by listening, it's pretty hard to do that. Reading is better at first. And how do you do that? In general language experience, there is one specific exercise that I like a lot that really helps with that. And it's very simple. So I really recommend all our listeners to try it. You take a very simple German sentence you can understand. Like, I don't know, so in English could be something like, yesterday I woke up very early, right? And then you close your eyes and you repeat the sentence without looking at the sentence. So if the sentence is very, very, very simple, maybe you'll be able to do it. But otherwise, you will notice that you struggle to remember the sentence in German. And you start noticing, oh, I'm not sure which word comes next, for example. In which order should I put the words? Like, heute ich, no, that doesn't work. Heute bin ich, right? So this kind of exercise to learn how to repeat a sentence without reading it at your level, so even easier than what you can understand, it's a good way to force your subconscious brain to learn these patterns and get used to these patterns, because our brain is lazy. So our brain doesn't want to learn generally. So we have to learn how to force it to learn things. And again, because the brain is lazy, if we show it that we want it to remember sentences and repeat them, then in order to save energies, it will learn these abstract patterns and get better at it. So again, take a sentence and try to get to the point where you can repeat the sentence out loud without looking at it, and then move to the next one. You don't want to learn that sentence long term. It's not about learning sentences that then you will repeat tomorrow or the day after. You just need to learn to be able to repeat them the next minute.
One question here, there's actually two things. Basically, this is listen and repeat, right? This is as old as language teaching, this technique. Yeah, you listen to a sentence and you repeat the sentence.
Can also be reading and repeat. So from this point of view, you don't need the listening part.
Yeah, you read the sentence and cover it and then try to remember it, right? So would you say it matters that I understand what I'm repeating? Or can I just take any sentence, read it, and then repeat it out loud? Does it matter?
It's better if you understand what you're saying. You could even remove parts of the sentence in order to make it more simple at first. So you can, instead of saying, for example, yes, in the morning I had a nice breakfast, you can start with yesterday I had breakfast. Then yesterday in the morning I had breakfast. Removing components and adding components, because you want your brain to get used to where the concepts are, where the brain will then expect things to be. Because for listening, what your brain is going to learn is also to expect certain things to be at a certain place. So for example, in German, after Vorfeld, the German brain is waiting for a verb. And also will save this verb for later, because the German brain knows that at the end of the sentence, something else may come, like a negation, like a nicht, or maybe another part of the verb, maybe like auf zu, or maybe, another verb completely that will change the meaning of the sentence. So you want your brain to get used to these structures so that your brain is ready for this. So you should definitely understand what you're saying. Make it simpler if you're not understanding yet.
I found this beautiful, right? So I've applied all of this in my courses intuitively. I've read everything, but you put it so nicely into words. It's just a pleasure. First of all, also to see I do things right, and also, to see there is a logic to it. And funny enough, it makes perfect sense that reading can actually help with listening. Yeah, sure, listening needs to be done as well, but that reading can aid. Even writing could help, because writing includes reading. So it's all connected. All the skills are connected, and I find this beautiful.
Nowadays, for example, I'm learning Chinese very slowly because it's just a hobby and it's very hard. And I'm focusing only on reading. I'm not trying to force my listening skills, because I know that for myself, it's the best investment to practice pattern, vocabulary, and so on, to get to a certain point of understanding of the language and how it works before I start investing in listening. And my wife, she's also learning Mandarin with me. She tried to boost listening, and it was just frustrating for her. And so now she's following the same path I'm following too, because she noticed that it's wasted effort. This is my experience. Maybe, other people have better experiences with listening specifically, but this is also my experience with all my students. So I'm pretty confident that it's a general rule. Yeah.
So we agreed that listening practice is an important part of learning German, right?
Yeah.
And we also discussed what materials to use. You said something very interesting there. Do you remember what that was? I think it was, we talked about slowing audio down. I get that request often, because in my courses, people have to write dictations or transcriptions, write down what you hear, and then say, it's too fast for me. Can I slow it down? I always advise against it. And you do the same. What do you suggest instead of slowing down?
Usually when people talk about slowing down audio, so spoken audio, recorded audio, of course, they mean to really slow down the track. So it starts sounding like this, right? And this is not helpful at all. It's even confusing. I think it's somehow harder to understand. So for a native speaker, it would be harder to understand, it would be very annoying, right? Because you're stretching the sounds and so on. And it's not useful, and you don't understand better. It's not good training. So in general, I would never do that. What would be useful? Also, when you are speaking with a foreigner person, is to do this, is to separate words, one word, and then the other, right? So separating single words, because these help the person isolate the word, understand that is one thing. So it's very useful if you find material where the person speaking is doing this. So separating single words. Then the second step is to separate parts of the sentence. For example, what have you done? So have you, so the verb and the pronoun go together. They are a component that go together. And the what and the done can be separated. What have you done today? So this kind of spacing of words and of components is extremely helpful to understand, and also to get the rhythm of the language, because native speakers, even if they speak very quickly and so everything is melted together somehow, they still group these clusters of words together. And then the other thing that is extremely helpful is if you stop after one sentence and leave time to the student to think about what they just heard. Like this, right? It isn't that easy to find this kind of material. For example, I found only one series of books for Chinese learners that does this. So they read, a text and they say the first sentence, then they say the second one. They always let you the time to repeat in your head what you just heard and try to make sense of it before the next sentence hits you. Because this is another problem. The listener doesn't have the time to think about, okay, what did I just hear? And what was that word again? Oh, okay, now I got it. Okay, next sentence, please. If you don't have material structured like that, in the worst case scenario, you can take an audio track and put it in a software like Audacity and actually cut it and separate them. This is something you can do. But another thing you can do is using certain plugins for things like YouTube or Netflix. There are plugins, they change every time, but there are these plugins that stop the video after each sentence. So they recognize the voice or they use subtitles. And when you have a full stop, they stop the video. So you can think about what you heard and then you can restart the video. And so there will be another sentence and then the video stops automatically. You can think about what you heard and then you continue.
We need to add a link to that, to the description, because I'm not aware of this, but I would like to see that as well.
They're old. It's 10 years at least they're around. The oldest one, I think, is Learning Languages with Netflix, I think.
Also, they do that?
Yeah, not from Netflix. That's the reason why they change, because they are not official plugins. So sometimes then they're deprecated, they don't work anymore. But there is the same thing for YouTube too. And there was at least. We can try to leave some links in the description. And so they are very useful for that reason. Of course, they are breaking the flow of the TV show or of the YouTube video, but for practice, they are gold. And if you maybe practice with someone or you have a tutor, a teacher, you can explain this way of speaking and practice it. It will help you incredibly. For example, with my Chinese tutors, I helped them develop this skill of how they should speak, how should they cluster words, separate words, make a pause, wait for me to say, okay, continue. I had to train them. But yeah, in a couple of hours, they got used to it. And this is incredibly helpful. Otherwise, native speakers just keep talking, make this flow, and it's extremely hard to understand.
I actually got an inspiration on how I could do this efficiently, because it's a lot of work to create a text and audio piece like this, where every word is separated. Well, a lot. It's doable, but I think I can even use ChatGPT to prepare a text and then put it into a text-to-speech software and add the breaks automatically. I like that. That should not take that long.
I think a native speaker can be trained to speak like that pretty quickly. In a few hours, they can manage to learn how to do that. And so to record a text wouldn't take that long. We can actually make some experiments, maybe create some material like that. And so to the listeners, write in the comments if you are interested, and maybe Michael and I will give a try and create something. Like and subscribe again also for these reasons, so you get a notification.
Yeah, I also have a newsletter you can sign up on my homepage, and you will also be informed about all the crazy things I do. That might actually be very interesting for you. I have something really big coming up soon. Now, back to resources. What can I actually use? What materials can I use? And what do you think is the most helpful? We talked about this, and we both actually agree there is a certain order in which materials are helpful. Can you list them maybe?
Yeah, I wrote the list so that I'm ready. So I have the list here. So from the easiest material, so from what is the best for beginners up to the hardest, the easiest materials are graded text audios. So graded text means that you have some text for A1, A2, and the audios that come with it, you can find a lot of them on YouTube too, are usually also lower if it's a lower level. and enunciate it better and so on. So this is the easiest form of listening practice you might find around. Then when we move into native speaker material, so we abandon the material for learners, so the graded material, then in my experience, generally the easiest contents are YouTube contents. Because YouTubers tend to make contents on a single topic and they all speak a simple language. There are subtitles, often, like in our case, edited subtitles. So they correspond to what the person is saying. And you also have the video showing you the thing they are talking about. So all these things together, simple language, good subtitles, and the video content make great materials for beginners, in my opinion.
So what about series and movies?
I was thinking about it because if we move up to the next year, then we get to TV shows. In my opinion, TV shows are better than movies for many reasons. So especially sitcoms are the best, in my opinion, because there is a lot of dialogue, often is more simple and standard dialogue in comparison to movies. And also, because there are episode after episode after episode, there are many episodes with the same characters, the same dialects, the same topics, and so on, you can get used to that. You can get used to the voices, to the vocabulary is often similar because they're talking about the same stuff. And so you actually improve with time. And when you switch to a new TV show, then you notice the difference. Seriality is important. And actually another thing, I recommend to start with dubbed TV shows. So for German, for example, I would take American TV shows and watch them in German. I know it's a torture from a certain point of view, from the point of view of the quality of acting and so on. And also it's not the original voices and whatever. But from the point of view of understanding, it's way easier to understand dubbed material. For two reasons. First, the translation makes it more standard. So you lose the authenticity, the specificity of the original version, but because the language becomes more standard, it's easier for a learner to understand that language. So first thing, more standard. Second, usually the original voicing is done in the real scene. And people are also mumbling and so on. There is noise and whatever. When they dub a TV show, they record in a studio. And usually the actors are way more clear because they are, close to the microphones and they are talking exactly like this, enunciating like it feels like a documentary. It sounds fake. That's why usually people don't like to watch dubbed material. But the fact that it's fake and a studio recording, it's better for learners because it's exactly more clear and more standard. So dubbed material is the first way to go.
One thing though, the new auto-dubbed versions that YouTube is forcing on us basically, I found those horrible. So this is because this is AI created or machine learning basically.
I never watched them. I don't know what you're talking about.
So as a channel creator, you can set a switch that auto-dubs your videos into 50 other languages, whatever YouTube decides.
Okay.
And that means if my browser language or my location is in Germany, then it will automatically have an AI dubbed audio for me.
Wow.
And I think what is that guy's, it sounds so weird. Who is this? And then I realize it is auto-dubbed and it's horrible. So this I do not recommend, but what you recommend can actually be pretty nice. If it really annoys you, by all means, watch something else. But in general, I agree.
Me, myself, for example, I've watched a lot of American TV shows in German. Rewatching stuff I already watched, like, for example, Friends. I watched it in English, in Spanish, in French, and in German. And every time it helped me, the fact that I already watched it many times, because I knew the context. I knew what was coming. And so I could understand and practice my German better because I knew the jokes almost by heart, right? So that was very helpful.
What jokes? I tried to watch it, but
well, Friends. I mean, come on. It's a classic.
Come on, man. It's a horrible show.
Okay, so yeah, to the listeners, please defend Friends in the comments. And then I start watching American TV shows that I never watched before. So, for example, I watched 2.5 Men, the whole show. I don't remember how many seasons, but a lot. in German without knowing them before. And only then, after a lot of practice, I start watching German original TV shows like Turkish für Anfänger, so Turkish for breakfast in English. Berlin also. So I start watching that, but way harder. And this is the next step, exactly. So after the American TV shows in German, I would move to the German TV shows in German as the next level of difficulty. Then in my list, there are the movies, of course. Then there are the podcasts. And I would say podcasts, we open another category because we are moving to a domain of audio only. You don't have video. And so we have podcasts, news on the radio, and audiobooks. And the order here is important. I think podcasts is the easiest version, so what I would start with, because a podcast usually is on a topic, a single topic. And therefore you have the time to start understanding more and more during the episode because they keep discussing the same subject. So maybe one word comes again and again and again over 20 minutes. Then we move to news because the problem with news is that often are quicker because in the news speakers know already what they're saying. And instead of having an actual conversation where people think about what they're saying, like right now, they have a text they're reading very quickly because native speakers want to get the news fast. And also they are moving from subject to subject, from topic to topic. And so maybe you don't have the time to get used to the topic and the next piece of news starts already. And then
the language is a different one. Yeah. So a lot more passive is used. Yeah. Maybe more conjunctive. So it's a bit different from how we normally speak. Yeah. Also, so that is to be considered. Yeah.
How they speak is different. Also because they're reading usually. People on the news are not improvising, are not like telling you what they heard. They have a script, they have a teleprompter, they are reading from the teleprompter. And then the last level are audiobooks. It happened many times to me that students were surprised by the fact that they couldn't understand audiobooks. Usually Harry Potter is the most loved one nowadays. Everybody tries to read Harry Potter in German nowadays. And they struggle with understanding by listening to the audiobook, even if they read the book before, if they know what's coming, and they don't understand why. The reason is simple. Audiobooks are the audio version of something that is meant to be written and read. So what I mean is, has been written, so the person sat down and has chosen the best words, maybe the most specific and some interesting forms of saying things with surprises, a twist, a plot twist, and so on. So it's written material, but also is meant to be read. Even for native speakers, is meant to be read. And is read out loud by an actor who knows the text, who studied the text before, and is acting it for native speakers. All these things together, the fact that it's literary work, that is written, so chosen words and structures, and that is read out loud for native speakers, makes audiobooks extremely hard to understand. It's the hardest, so the highest tier in my list, in my opinion.
Yeah, but there's often also spoken language in the book, right? Just that it's one person reading everything, and it's not the same as listening to a conversation, like in a movie where you have people actually talking and not every sentence ends with "he said." Yeah, so that's an advantage. I want to add something to the news because there is news for children, which are actually lovely. They use simpler language. It's much easier to follow. So my strong recommendation to look that up. And audiobooks, I personally struggle listening to them in whatever language, simply because they're so monotonous. If you have a very good speaker, okay, yeah, like Dirk Bach has a wonderful one. I put the link in there, but it's for advanced students only. What I prefer is audio plays. Such a beautiful experience with Lord of the Rings, audio play from the BBC, or Hitchhiker's Guide Through the Galaxy. Beautiful memories, so emotional, so lively. It's like listening to a movie. Yeah. And this might also be an idea. In the past, I was a big fan of Spaceballs by Mel Brooks. And what I did, I don't know how I managed to do that, I recorded the audio on tape. And I was listening to it because I really loved it. I knew the whole movie by heart. I knew what was coming. And then I was listening to it again and again. It was really beautiful. Yeah. So certainly with technology, this is also possible. You have to be a bit careful with copyright these days, yeah. But I think for your own use, this is doable. Just some advice, how I did it in the 90s, early 90s.
That works. For example, I listened to the audiobook of Harry Potter in German when I was learning German. But first thing, I used Harry Potter myself also to practice French, English, and Spanish. I read it in Italian, so I knew the story really by heart. And the audiobook of Harry Potter is read by Rufus Beck, if I'm not wrong. Very good actor. So as you said, right, it was really acted, was really nice, but still was very hard. So I had to listen to the same chapter again and again and again. It was really training. So if you are at a higher level of proficiency and you're in for a challenge, go for it, of course. But don't be surprised if you find it hard, because it is. So that's it.
Yeah, you need to understand a certain amount in order for this to be pleasurable. Before I come to the last question, there's one more thing. When people always ask me, what shall I read or what shall I watch? In this case, what shall I listen to? Mm-hmm. I always advise listen or watch something that you would be interested in your native language. Yeah. For example, there's a series called Nicos Weg, made by Deutsche Welle, and it's free to use, so people use it and it's well done. But man, that story is so boring for me. Yeah. I could, for the life of me, not watch it in whatever language it would be. If it was the only resource, maybe. But I find it difficult to watch because it's an insult for my brain. It's my personal opinion. Huh? As I say, people love it. Give it a shot. But watch something that you really could engage with. I learned English watching Star Trek Next Generation, and luckily I liked it because it was the only thing that was in native language on TV back in the days. So look for something that you really feel like you want to understand. It's beautiful. It touches you. That makes a whole difference if you can find it. Yeah. If not, you have to eat what's on the plate. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I feel you. Nicos Weg, for example, it's very hard to watch for me too. But on the other hand, as a complete beginner, it's better than nothing. So as you said, give it a try. And, I watched Extra in German, and I was appreciating the fact that I could watch something in German and understand it. And that feeling was more important than having an actual good TV show for a while. Then, of course, I got tired.
But Extra is already so blöd, dass es schon wieder gut ist, as we say in German. It's so bad, it's good again. Yeah, so yeah, sure. As I say, if you have no choice, then you eat what's on the plate.
Let us know in the comment if you like Nicos Weg or Extra, or if you tried something else, or if you found something else. I'm also always eager to learn about new resources, materials that maybe I missed. Right?
Last question. So you mentioned watching series and movies with subtitles. So when watching a movie or series with subtitles, do I turn them to English or German? Or maybe I shouldn't use them at all?
Yeah, the subtitle question. I'm sure this will start a flame war. So, lots of comments surely about this topic, because people are often very opinionated on the topic. Well, the first question is English or German, right? English subtitles. I would watch something in German as a beginner with English subtitles only with the goal to get used to the fact that that's a spoken language, I may say. So, for example, I watched a lot of TV shows in Chinese with English subtitles at the beginning of my journey. And the English subtitles didn't help me to learn any Chinese, and those shows didn't teach me any Chinese. But watching those shows showed me that Chinese was actually a spoken language, that there were people having lives in Chinese and loving and hating and fighting, being friends, having, stories in Chinese. So convinced my brain on a very subconscious, deep level that thing I was learning, those strange sounds and symbols, were actually alive. And also a little bit to get used to the sound of it, to the sound, not in the sense of the single phonemes, but more like the melody and so on. So when you start with a new language, it feels a little bit like alien and fake. So like this feeling of, come on, that's not even a language. And that is an alien thing. It has nothing to do with me. Watching TV shows in that language, even if you don't understand anything, but you use the subtitles in English, helps you getting that language and that culture closer to you. And this is psychologically important. So for this reason, with this goal in mind only, then watching TV shows with English subtitles makes sense for a while. From the point of view of learning the language, in my opinion, is kind of useless. It would be interesting to have the English translation before you listen to a line. So if you could have the possibility, and some apps, we said before, some plugins give you something similar. If you have the possibility to read the English translation before you're gonna hear the line spoken by the actor, this could be useful, because then you would already know the content of what the person is gonna say, and this will help you make the best of what you hear. So this would be useful. And the closest, easiest version of this is just to watch an episode in English and then rewatch the episode in German. That could be an option. Otherwise, the English subtitles is distracting so much from listening that it's even counterproductive. It's annoying. I wouldn't do that.
So should I use subtitles to begin with?
Well, we can move to the German ones. So then, right, then we have the German ones, right? So German subtitles. There is one problem to address right away. On a lot of platforms, most platforms, if we talk about movies and TV shows, the subtitles do not correspond. And this is extremely annoying, in my opinion. This is extremely distracting. So this is already a problem. The first question is, do you have subtitles that actually correspond one-to-one to what is said? That's why before I mentioned YouTube, where a lot of times the subtitles are edited and are really word-by-word transliteration of what is said. So if the subtitles do not correspond one-to-one to the spoken voices, I wouldn't use it, because it's it's even confusing, frustrating. You don't understand why you don't hear what you read. So I would avoid that completely. If it corresponds one-to-one, it's mostly reading practice. That's the problem. So you're really focusing on reading, and then you are also listening how a native speaker would pronounce that. These has pros and cons. So to do it a little bit, especially considering it a fast reading exercise, could make sense. Why not? Do it a bit. But then I would stop at a certain point, because it's even detrimental for your listening and your pronunciation. Because the fact that you are processing the reading part with your brain, which has priority, and the fact that your pronunciation in your head is not native, means that you are distorting what you're hearing, and you're thinking you hear something based on what you're reading. This is a phenomenon we know. I think there is in every language this kind of videos where there is a song from another language, in a language we don't understand, for example, a song in Arabic, and with subtitles in English or in Italian or in German. And because the subtitles are words that are similar to how it may sound in a little bit similar, when you're reading the subtitles, you think that you are hearing the singer singing in your language exactly those words that are written in the subtitles, because reading overrides hearing. So what I'm saying here is that if you think that by watching TV shows with subtitles in German, you are improving your listening skills, this is delusional. So I don't think that works. Actually, you risk doing the opposite. So if you want to use TV shows or movies and so on to practice listening, you should get rid of subtitles completely.
Yeah, I would say I mostly agree. I like your argument for English subtitles and getting used to the language being spoken by people and used in real life. But reading German subtitles while listening to German, even though there is tiny differences, the closed captions are usually not 100% off, right? It might actually give you alternative ways to express what you're looking at. But I agree that it's not the ideal way to learn a language. But I have an exercise in my courses which I call read along. So you read while you listen. And of course, audio and text are one-to-one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, not to cause confusion, of course. And I do this mainly that people get a little bit used to how the written language corresponds to the spoken language. Mm-hmm. So if I say Vater, there's no O there. There's an ER Yeah. And if you see this 1,000 times over the course of your lessons, at one point it might sink in, for example. That is one of the main reasons. And plus, you get accustomed to the language. It's not that I expect you to understand everything. And the reading makes it easier. Yeah. And you can pause after 3 words, after a sentence. When you read, you know where to pause. Yeah. More or less. Even if you're a beginner, that's much more doable. So it's some help. But on TV I find, or anything video, I find a bit heavy. It's heavy material. You have to watch. You have to be very attentive. While a text and audio, it's much more comfortable, much more portable than videos.
What I think is more productive for me is to read first and then listen to it. So something you can do, for example, for everything that has a transcription. Many podcasts nowadays have transcriptions. On YouTube, you can activate the transcriptions. So not the subtitles in the video, right, but the transcriptions. So sentence by sentence too. For example, I listened to a Chinese podcast for learners, of course, not original material. So it's in Chinese, but it's for learners, so it's simple. And on the same page, you have the player and the text. So I read 2-3 sentences, right? So I know what he's going to say. Then I close my eyes and I just listen to him telling me those sentences. Then I stop and then I read the next sentences. So this is how I help my listening. But I try to avoid reading and listening. Even if in Chinese is less problematic because the symbols don't use the same letters. Because this is the problem with our languages. We use the same alphabets. So, when you see a V, it's a vowel, but it's the same we use in Spanish, in French, but we pronounce them differently. So that is what's annoying. So in Chinese, the problem isn't there because the symbols are completely different. But even there, I prefer to read first, get an idea, know what's coming, and then completely listen to it. Because last thing, but I think it's important, you have to think about your brain as a processor of a computer, right? And if you ask your brain to read and listen, compare, and so on, you are asking your brain to do a lot of things at once. Has to process the reading, process the listening, process the possible meaning, comparing them, noticing, that word does not correspond in the closed caption to this. All this process is a lot, to do at once. So you're using less computational power, less brain on every single task. So you're doing it worse. So it's better to even close your eyes when you're listening, if possible, if you really want to focus on listening. And so if you can separate the processes of reading and listening and so on, I think it's better. Yeah.
Last thing, songs. We haven't talked about songs.
Yeah.
What at all? Like, what's your opinion on that?
It depends on the songs, because songs often don't use standard language patterns and standard words, but they are great to repeat and really learn by heart certain patterns and certain vocabulary. So personally, I used songs a lot learning languages, also because I play guitar and sing. So I learned the song and I sang the song, and this meant to practice pronunciation, right? Because you keep listening and you imitate really the sounds exactly, because you keep listening to the same song and you reproduce them as sounds, as part of the music. So you don't interpret them with your accent, but you try to get them as close as possible to what you hear. So they're great for pronunciation and they're great for practicing patterns. For listening practice, well, it depends on the song, really, because think, for example, about the most extreme example of bad songs to practice with, opera. Do you understand German by opera song? Right. In Italian, I mean, it depends. There are a couple of singers, especially if in certain pitches, like tenors, for example, where you can still understand if you're really skilled what they're singing, but mostly you cannot, because singing deforms the voice, the sounds, and so on. So for listen to songs isn't that helpful in my opinion. It's a good practice for vocabulary, for patterns, and so on. Your songs are great for patterns, especially, right? If the listeners don't know what I'm talking about, well, you should look them up, because those are songs made exactly with that goal in mind, right? To practice certain patterns. That is great, yes. normal songs, it really depends. Let's do it a bit. Why not? And if you like it and you see that you're learning vocabulary and so on, do it. But for listening, I don't think it makes that much of a difference.
Yeah, it's more about the emotional connection, right? If a song really gets you and then you say, "Du hast mich," yeah, whatever that everybody can say, and you learn the difference between hast and hast. No? Yeah. Why not? So a strong recommendation, not as the only form of input, of course not. But it's an emotional connection, and that is very valuable, especially when you struggle. The stronger your connection to the German culture and language, the more fun it is actually. And the less problematic are motivational lows or difficult times. And so, strong recommendation to add some to that and find your niche there. Yeah. Heavy metal might be a bit tough, but you get there.
Yeah, it's important to find songs with standard language, maybe somehow spoken, maybe hip hop and so on, for example, is not that bad. Again, I look forward to read about the experiences of our listeners. So if anybody here is listening to German music, what they like, what they recommend.
And on this high note, thank you, Alessio. It was a very insightful and exciting topic. And as I say, it's just beautiful to see this laid out so logically and so nicely by your beautiful mind.
Thank you.
And hope the listeners took something away from it. I'm pretty sure actually they do. And if you have any more questions or suggestions for materials, techniques, whatever you do, just share it with us. We will comment on that, of course. Yeah. And all I can say in the end is take your time. It will take time. Yeah. Don't expect miracles. That the listening skill takes months, if not years, to evolve, and it's just the way it is. Yeah. Have a lovely day, morning, evening, whatever it is where you are, and auf Wiedersehen.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.